Boerne Radio 103.9 FM. Coming up at 10:30, Dale Adams and Ron Cisneros bring a thought-provoking conversation to the airwaves with Ceasefire. Time now for The Ascent, sponsored by Crestmont Private Wealth on Boerne Radio.
The opinions expressed are those of the host. The material is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute investment advice, and it is not intended as an endorsement for any specific investment. Visit crestmontpw.com for more details.
Welcome to The Ascent. This is Sam McGee with Crestmont Private Wealth, and we are recording in the Crestmont studio with Baron Wiley of Boerne Radio. So if you hear a faint sound of Main Street when a big truck goes by, well, about a month ago, it would have been a lot louder, but we did get a grant from the city of Boerne to replace our windows in this historic building. So we're very proud of that. And so we have double paned, energy efficient windows. And we now can record here every once in a while. And today I've got Alec Walker, who is our EVP of Financial Planning in our Houston, Texas office with us. Welcome to the show, Alec.
Hey, Sam. Good morning. Happy to be here. Yeah, those new windows, that'll help with that summer heat coming in. Keep that office a little bit cooler for all of our employees and teammates.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, Hannah Perry moved here just a couple weeks ago, and this is her first week back in the office, and she and I both like it to be almost meat locker quality temperature. So we are currently at 70 degrees in here. Yeah, it's fantastic.
Today, I was just wanting to jump on and give our listeners an update on I guess it's titled the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or the Tax Cuts and Job Act 2.0. So I'm not going to, do an impersonation of that One Big Beautiful Bill in the President Trump voice. I'll let others do that. But, this is a little bit more of a tax planning flavor. And just a caveat, just to kind of on the front end, Crestmont is not a CPA. We do not provide tax advice, but it's our job as financial planners and advisors for our clients to stay up to date and stay knowledgeable on what is going on from a tax standpoint, because it has such a big impact on the financial plan. So we'll kind of start with, what happened with the Tax Cuts and Job Acts 1.0, just kind of a high level overview of what occurred there. The main thing was it lowered personal income tax brackets. So we saw for most individuals and families, their income tax brackets were lowered. Some certain areas it was increased depending on your situation. There was a major increase in the standard deductions. So previously, people were maybe itemizing their property taxes, itemizing their mortgage interest, their charitable contributions. But that standard deduction was increased so significantly that most people started electing that increased standard deduction. We saw some eliminations, reductions in state and local property taxes. So that kind of was the increase the standard deduction on one end, reduce those other itemized deductions on the other. We doubled the child tax credit. We doubled the gift and estate tax exemption. So that was the big increase. So that was increasing the lifetime gift and estate tax deduction from roughly about $5 to $6 million to about $12 million. So that meant that people that were potentially, say you were a married couple with a net worth of $15 million, you would potentially have had a state tax issue, but that new law passed to really greatly reduce the likelihood of that becoming an issue for you. So going into this election cycle, some of these provisions that were set to sunset, and they were set to sunset at the end of 2025, that was kind of on the voting ballot as well. So it looks like some of these are going to remain in force, and we'll talk about what those details are. And then finally, we'll touch on this one thing that was created in the first act was the creation of the 199A deduction, qualified business income deduction. And just high level, what this was corporate taxes were decreased as part of that bill. So we saw the corporate tax rate decline, which is, maybe a boom for stock investors, things like that. But many businesses across the country aren't corporations. They're small to medium-sized businesses. They're kind of the stealthy wealthy. Think of like maybe a big regional auto dealership or a regional beverage distributor. So they weren't benefiting from those corporate tax deductions. So that's where this new 199A deduction came in to give them some relief on the income tax side as those types of business owners. So that was what happened in the past. And so let's talk about this recent One Big Beautiful bill that was just passed by the House on May 22nd, currently going through the Senate. So again, a lot of what we're talking about that is proposed to be changed could be modified. So take all of this with a little bit of a grain of salt.
News happens pretty fast, and so we're going to get this one on the air pretty soon.
Yeah, so this passed narrowly by about one vote in the House, which was pretty surprising. But high level, what was kind of extended or amended from that first one? So the reduced income tax brackets, those are going to remain in place. So those are not going to be sunsetting at the end of this year if it passes. The enhanced standard deduction, that is also going to remain in place. So I believe the current proposal is that for a married couple filing jointly for 2025, that standard deduction would be $32,000 per year. A slight change there, improvement, maybe for our retired clients or clients in the summit, for each spouse that is 65 or older, there's proposed an additional $4,000 bonus standard deduction. So that could be $8,000 total for a married couple. Now that is potentially to be phased out at about $250,000 in adjusted gross income, but potentially if your income is below that, you would have an additional $8,000 standard deduction. So there's some potential relief there for some of our summit clients. So those were the two main things on kind of the income tax, personal tax side. I would say, Sam, that the other major change is related to the SALT cap, or the state and local tax deduction. So as I stated earlier, that was reduced to $10,000. So that meant that you were kind of capped out. If your property taxes, especially here in Texas, where, we've got no state income tax, but our property taxes are a bit higher, you could have property taxes on your home of $20,000. But because of those new rules, you were only able to itemize $10,000 of those taxes.
Yeah, in fact, I'm sitting here looking at my protest hearing that I'm having a little bit later today. So yeah, that's not a very fun experience for many people. Is seeing the rise in property values is good on one hand if you're selling, but on the other hand, gosh, property taxes going well above that SALT deduction, can't benefit from it, right?
Yeah.
So maybe translate a little bit for us what you think may happen here.
Yeah, so what it looks like may happen with that is the proposed increase. It was initially $30,000, but it looks like at the latest, the bill passing is going to be $40,000 is the maximum cap there.
That's big.
Quite a significant jump. Now that amount will phase out and start to phase down. So for, again, like to use kind of married filing jointly, by the time you get to about maybe $500,000 in AGI, it would kind of at that point have reduced back down to $10,000 in the amount that you can deduct. So, but if it's anywhere from that $10,000 to $40,000 range, depending on your income, I expect a lot more people between property taxes, if they carry a mortgage, being able to write off their mortgage interest and charitable deductions. I think people might start to, some of that would shift back from, hey, everyone's using the standard deduction or most, to there's a little bit more of a balance there.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, we were talking earlier about the impact of this and thinking about people that may be really wealthy and be at the summit and be retired, and they made a lot of income, but maybe in retirement, they had a bunch of after-tax assets they could pull from and savings they can pull from. And maybe their tax rate isn't that high in retirement, and they may benefit from this, right?
That's exactly right. Yeah, maybe while you're working, especially at the end of your career, when you're in higher earning years, some of these benefits may not be as impactful. But once you get to retirement, I see for most people that we see, they're kind of hovering in that 20 to 25% average tax rate, which means that their adjusted gross income could benefit from some of these proposed changes. Just a few other extensions, the child tax credit that was increased during the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act 1.0. They're proposing that there will be actually an enhanced tax credit from $2,000 to $2,500 over the next 3 years. And then after that 3-year period, kind of maintaining that original increased level. So again, benefit there for children ages newborns to 16. And then that Section 199A, that qualified business income tax deduction, just touching on that again real quickly. This is something I would definitely consult with your CPA or tax advisor on. They're increasing that amount. The proposal is to increase that from 20 to 23%. And then additionally, there was a restriction on the type of business that you had that would phase out much quicker, and it appears that they're reducing that. So this could be for some service-related businesses such as, accounting firms, law firms, medical practices, financial services firms like ourselves. So definitely reach out to your tax advisor or CPA to ask about that once we get final passage on this bill.
Thank you, Alec. That is quite a bit. If somebody was listening to this and they're driving and they're not jotting this down and they want to get a recap of this, we do these newsletters that have more content-based in writing. How would they reach out to you to get more on this?
Yeah, they could reach out to Crestmont at info@crestmontpw.com or me directly at Alec, ALEC, at crestmontpw.com. Happy to have a conversation or at least get you signed up on our newsletter so you can see some of this information. We're going to be sending out some updates on this bill as it continues to pass and go through the congressional process.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you might be optimistic about that. We'll see where it goes. And maybe just while we're on the topic, since we bring up this newsletter concept that goes out after our Boerne Radio show on Saturday, which then goes to our podcast on Sunday on most of the major podcast networks, maybe explain for our listeners how they can get the written content that accompanies this podcast on every Monday. What does that look like when we're recording these shows? What kind of content can they expect if they do sign up and reach out to you?
Yeah, so we send out pretty regular content tailored to our client segmentation. So you'll see at the beginning of our newsletters, whether it's for the Trailhead, the Ascent, the Summit, or in this case, is related to tax changes. That's all stages. It's going to affect everyone at each stage. That's on a quarterly basis. So once a quarter, if you're at the Trailhead or you're at the Summit, you're going to have something that's tailored pretty specifically to your situation. We like to include, obviously, our podcast audio sometimes, different videos, and then lots of financial charts and data from leading research out there in the marketplace, some from external sources and also some curated in-house using our own tools and technology.
Oh, that's great. And so in case you missed it, you can reach out to us at info@crestmontpw.com, or you can walk by and wave at us on Main Street at 604 South Main. If you happen to be in Houston, we're at One Riverway in Houston, up in the big Class A tower there. Go say hi to Alec, Rebecca, and Daniel down there.
If anybody knows me, wants to reach out, be happy to meet you somewhere for a good cup of coffee or grab some lunch at one of our fine Houston restaurants.
Excellent. Yes, you definitely have some really good food in Houston. Quit bragging about it. Yeah, we have some good stuff here in Boerne, though. We have some good stuff. So thank you for joining us, Alec, and this was very insightful, and I hope everyone has a great weekend, and God bless.